The whispering shadows of Willow Creek. In the heart of a remote valley, cradled by dense, ancient woods, lay a forgotten village named Willow Creek. The village was tucked away from the bustling world, and only a few had ventured into its territory. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the modern world had not yet left its mark. The villagers lived simple lives, relying on the land and their close-knit community. But Willow Creek was not without its secrets, and these secrets were whispered through the rustling leaves, carried on the wind that howled through the trees and echoed in the silence of the night. For generations, the villagers had spoken of the whispering shadows, an ancient force that dwelled in the woods. It was said that these shadows could communicate with the living, offering them knowledge, power, and sometimes terrible curses. No one knew where they came from or what they truly were, but the stories persisted, passed down from one generation to the next. The older villagers would warn the younger ones never to venture too deep into the forest, especially after dusk, when the shadows were most active. But as with all tales, curiosity often got the better of people. One crisp autumn evening, as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the land, a young man named Elias found himself drawn to the woods. Elias was a stranger to Willow Creek, having arrived only a few weeks earlier. He had come in search of peace, hoping to escape the noise and chaos of the city. The village seemed like the perfect sanctuary, but Elias had always been a seeker, someone who craved knowledge and adventure. The tales of the whispering shadows intrigued him, and despite the villagers' warnings, he couldn't resist the pull of the unknown. The forest was thick and foreboding, the trees towering overhead, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. As Elias walked deeper into the woods, the air grew colder and the light of the setting sun was swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional hoot of an owl. The path he followed was narrow, almost overgrown, and he had to push aside branches and brambles to continue. Yet, there was something oddly comforting about the solitude of the forest, as if it was welcoming him, guiding him toward a destination known only to the shadows. After what felt like hours, Elias came upon a clearing. The moon had risen, its pale light bathing the scene in an eerie glow. In the center of the clearing stood a massive oak tree, its gnarled roots digging deep into the earth. The tree was ancient, its bark twisted and cracked, and it exuded a sense of timelessness. Beneath the tree, partially obscured by fallen leaves, was a stone altar, covered in strange, faded symbols. Elias's heart quickened as he approached the altar, drawn by an invisible force. As he stood before the altar, he felt a presence. It was as if the shadows themselves were watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he considered turning back. But the curiosity that had driven him this far was too strong to resist. He reached out and touched the stone, feeling the cold, rough surface beneath his fingertips. The moment his hand made contact, the forest around him seemed to come alive. The wind picked up, swirling through the trees, carrying with it whispers that were barely audible, yet unmistakable. The shadows at the edge of the clearing began to shift and move, as if they had taken on a life of their own. They danced along the forest floor, slithering like serpents, their forms ever-changing, never fully revealing themselves. The whispers grew louder and more insistent, and Elias realized they were speaking to him, though the words were in a language he could not understand. Suddenly the air grew thick, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The temperature dropped, and Elias could see his breath misting in front of him. He felt a chill run down his spine as the shadows drew closer, encircling him, closing in. Panic began to set in, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. The whispers were now inside his head, echoing through his mind, filling him with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Just when he thought he could bear it no longer, the whispers ceased and the shadows receded, retreating to the edges of the clearing. The air grew still, and a heavy silence fell over the forest. Elias stood there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But before he could collect his thoughts, a voice, clear and strong, broke the silence. "Why have you come here, Elias?" The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was deep, resonant and carried a weight that made it impossible to ignore. Elias looked around, but he saw no one. The shadows remained at the periphery, watchful but still. I wanted to know, Elias stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to understand the stories. The voice was silent for a moment, as if considering his words. Then, it spoke again, softer this time, almost gentle. The shadows hold many secrets, but knowledge comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it? Elias hesitated. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to leave, to run as fast as he could and never look back. But another part, the part that had led him to this place, urged him to stay, to learn, to discover the truth. With a deep breath, he nodded. Yes, I want to know. The air around him shifted, and the shadows began to move once more. Slowly at first, then faster, swirling around him like a storm. The whispers returned, filling his mind, but this time they were clearer, more distinct. He could understand the words, and they spoke of ancient times, of forgotten rituals and lost knowledge, of power and danger intertwined. As the shadows danced, they began to form shapes, images that flickered in and out of existence like memories brought to life. Elias saw visions of the past, of villagers long gone who had stood where he now stood, seeking answers, seeking power. He saw the rituals they performed, the offerings they made to the shadows, and the terrible consequences that befell those who dared to ask too much. The images shifted, showing him glimpses of the future, of what could be if he chose to walk the path laid before him. He saw himself standing at the altar, performing the same rituals, unlocking secrets that had been buried for centuries. He saw the power he could wield, the knowledge he could gain, but he also saw the darkness that would consume him if he was not careful. The visions were overwhelming, and Elias felt his strength waning. The shadows pressed closer, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were offering him a choice, a chance to gain what he sought, but at a cost. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, torn between the desire to know and the fear of what he might become. In the end, it was the voice that guided him. It spoke again, clear and calm, cutting through the chaos in his mind. The shadows are not evil, Elias, but they are not benevolent either. They are what they are, ancient, powerful, and indifferent. They can give you what you seek, but you must be prepared for the consequences. The choice is yours. Elias closed his eyes, taking a deep breath as he tried to center himself. The images, the whispers, the shadows, all of it began to fade into the background as he focused on the voice, on the words. He knew he had a decision to make, one that would change his life forever. When he opened his eyes, the shadows had receded, and the forest was quiet once more. The altar stood before him, silent and unassuming, but he knew what it represented. He knew that the path he chose would lead him to either great knowledge or great ruin. With a final, resolute breath, Elias reached out and placed his hands on the altar. The moment his fingers touched the stone, he felt a surge of energy, powerful and intoxicating, rush through him. The shadows around him whispered their approval, and he knew that he had made his choice. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Elias began to recite the ancient words that had been burned into his mind by the shadows. His voice was steady, filled with conviction, as he called upon the forces that dwelled within the woods. The shadows responded, swirling around him in a frenzy, their whispers now a chorus, a hymn of power and mystery. Trees and Beluntu around beneath him trembled, and the air crackled with energy. The oak tree, ancient and wise, seemed to lean closer, its branches creaking as if in anticipation. The symbols on the altar began to glow with an ethereal light, pulsating with the rhythm of the words Elias spoke. As the ritual reached its climax, the shadows converged on the altar, merging into a single swirling mass of darkness. The whispers became a roar, filling the clearing with a sound that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The energy in the air was palpable, vibrating with a power that was beyond anything. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The shadows dissipated, the whispers faded, and the forest returned to its normal state. The altar was silent, the symbols once again dull and lifeless. The oak tree stood tall and still, its branches no longer moving. Elias stood in the clearing, his hands still resting on the cold stone of the altar. The world around him was eerily quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The rush of energy he had felt moments before was gone, leaving him feeling hollow and drained. He could hardly believe that the intense, mystical experience had just occurred. It felt like a dream, one that was slipping away from his grasp with every passing second. He slowly pulled his hands away from the altar and stepped back, his legs shaky and weak. The weight of what he had just done settled on his shoulders, heavy and oppressive. The shadows had offered him knowledge and power, but at what cost? He had no idea what he had unleashed or what the consequences would be. A deep sense of unease began to creep into his thoughts, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Elias knew that he couldn't stay in the clearing any longer. The forest felt different, now more alive and watchful than before. It was as if the trees and shadows were observing him, waiting to see what he would do next. The sense of being watched made his skin prickle with unease. He turned and began to retrace his steps, leaving the clearing and the ancient oak tree behind. The walk back through the forest was long and tense. The path that had seemed so clear on his way in now felt confusing and treacherous. The branches seemed to reach out toward him, as if trying to hold him back, and the shadows that had once been distant now felt closer, more tangible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through him. The forest had become a maze of darkness, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Finally, after what felt like hours, Elias emerged from the woods and stumbled back into the village. The familiar sight of the small cottages and the dim glow of lanterns brought a sense of relief, but it was short-lived. The village, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed different, more oppressive, more suffocating. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was unsettling. As Elias walked through the narrow streets, he noticed that the villagers were avoiding him. They watched him from behind closed curtains, their eyes filled with suspicion and fear. He could feel their gazes boring into him, and he realized that they must have known where he had gone and what he had done. The stories of the whispering shadows were well known, and anyone who ventured into the forest was forever marked by their presence. When Elias finally reached the small cottage he had been staying in, he shut the door behind him and leaned against it, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence inside the cottage was suffocating, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. He lit a candle, its small flame flickering unsteadily, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. For a moment he considered packing his things and leaving the village that very night, but something held him back. The shadows had given him knowledge, fragments of ancient rituals, glimpses of lost secrets, and he couldn't just walk away from that. He moved to the small table by the window and pulled out an old, leather-bound journal. The pages were blank, waiting to be filled. Elias sat down and began to write, his hands shaking as he recorded everything he had experienced in the forest, the visions, the whispers, the ritual. It all poured out onto the page, the words flowing faster than he could think. He wrote until his hand ached and his mind was numb, and still, he felt as if he had only scratched the surface of what he had learned. As he finished writing, a sense of unease washed over him once more. He had written down the knowledge the shadows had given him, but he didn't fully understand it. The symbols, the rituals, they were ancient and complex, and he had only caught glimpses of their true meaning. He knew that he needed to study them further, to decipher the fragments of knowledge that had been imparted. But as he sat there, staring at the words on the page, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and move, and the whispers that had filled the forest now echoed faintly in his mind. He realized with a start that the presence he had felt in the woods had followed him back to the village, lingering in the shadows, waiting for something. The next few days passed in a blur. Elias kept to himself, poring over the journal, trying to make sense of the fragments of knowledge he had written down. The villagers continued to avoid him, and the oppressive atmosphere in the village grew heavier with each passing day. The whispers grew louder in his mind, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, more substantial. He felt as if he was being drawn deeper into the mystery, as if the shadows were pulling him towards some inevitable conclusion. One night, As the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the village, Elias had a dream. He was standing in the clearing once more, the ancient oak tree towering over him. The shadows were all around, swirling and shifting, and the whispers were loud and clear, but this time they were not offering him knowledge. Instead, they were demanding something, an offering, a sacrifice. Elias awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. The dream had felt so real, so vivid, and the demand of the shadows echoed in his mind. He knew that he couldn't ignore the shadows' demands. The knowledge they had given him came with a price, and that price was now being called in. But what did they want? The thought of a sacrifice, of offering something, or someone, to the shadows filled him with dread. He had seen the consequences of such rituals in the visions. The shadows had shown him, and he knew that the price could be terrible. Over the next few days, Elias became increasingly restless. The whispers were relentless, invading his thoughts, urging him to fulfill the shadows' demands. The shadows themselves seemed to grow bolder, moving closer, pressing in around him. He could feel their presence in every corner of the cottage, and the oppressive atmosphere in the village was almost unbearable. The villagers avoided him even more than before, their fear palpable. Then, one night, the whispers stopped. The shadows receded, leaving Elias in a strange, unsettling silence. It was as if the shadows had withdrawn, waiting for something. Elias knew that the time had come to make a decision. The knowledge he had gained from the shadows was powerful, but it was also dangerous. If he chose to follow the path laid out before him, he would be stepping into a world of darkness and uncertainty, where the line between power and destruction was thin. With a heavy heart, Elias made his choice. He gathered the items he would need for the ritual: candles, herbs, and the journal filled with the fragments of knowledge the shadows had given him, and left the cottage. The village was silent as he walked through the streets, the moonlight casting long shadows on the ground. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but Elias felt a strange sense of calm as he entered its depths. The path to the clearing was familiar now, and Elias walked it with purpose. The shadows that had once seemed so menacing were now merely a part of the forest, guiding him toward his destination. When he reached the clearing, he saw that the ancient oak tree and the stone altar were exactly as he had left them, unchanged by the passage of time. Elias set up the ritual carefully, following the instructions that had been whispered to him in his dreams. The candles were placed in a circle around the altar, their flames flickering in the night breeze. The herbs were scattered on the ground, their scent filling the air. Finally, he opened the journal and began to recite the words he had written, the ancient incantations that would summon the shadows. The forest responded immediately. The wind picked up, swirling around the clearing, and the shadows began to move, coalescing into a single, dark mass. The whispers returned, filling the air with their eerie, melodic chant. Elias felt the familiar surge of energy, but this time it was stronger, more intense. The shadows were drawing closer, their presence overwhelming. As the ritual reached its peak, the shadows converged on the altar, their whispers now a deafening roar. Elias felt the energy pulsing through him, powerful and intoxicating, but he also felt the darkness creeping in, threatening to consume him. The shadows demanded a sacrifice, and Elias knew that the price he had to pay was not just a physical offering. It was a piece of his soul. With a final, desperate breath, Elias completed the ritual. The shadows surged forward, engulfing the altar in darkness, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. The whispers fell silent, and the only sound was the beating of Elias's heart, echoing in the silence. Then the shadows receded, and the clearing was empty once more. The candles had burned out, the herbs were gone, and the journal lay open on the altar, its pages blank. The ritual was over, but Elias felt no sense of relief. The knowledge he had gained from the shadows was still with him, but it was tainted, corrupted by the darkness that now lingered in his mind. As Elias left the clearing and made his way back to the village, he felt the weight of the shadow's presence, a constant, oppressive force that would never leave him. The price he had paid for his knowledge was steep, and he knew that he would carry the burden of that choice for the rest of his life. The village of Willow Creek would always be a place of mystery and darkness, a place where the shadows whispered their secrets to those who dared to listen. And Elias, now forever marked by the shadows, would be both a guardian and a prisoner of the knowledge he had sought so desperately to obtain. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Elias reached the edge of the village. The shadows were still with him, lurking in the corners of his vision, whispering their ancient secrets. But he was no longer the same man who had walked into the forest that autumn evening. He had been changed, irrevocably, by the shadows, and the path he had chosen would lead him down a road of darkness and power, a road that had no end. And so, the story of Elias and the whispering shadows of Willow Creek would be passed down through the generations, a cautionary tale of the dangers of seeking knowledge from forces beyond human understanding, and the terrible price that must be paid for such power. Shadows in the wheat field. The sun had begun its slow descent beyond the horizon, casting long shadows over the vast fields of golden wheat that stretched as far as the eye could see. The small, isolated farm nestled in the heart of this seemingly endless landscape had been the Miller family's home for generations. The house, a weathered structure with peeling white paint and a sagging roof, stood as a silent witness to the passage of time. It was here that the story of the strange occurrences began. Events that would leave an indelible mark on the land and those who dared to live there. The Millers were a humble family, hardworking and rooted in their traditions. John Miller, the patriarch, was a man of few words but many skills. His wife, Mary, was the heart of the home, her laughter once filling the air as sweetly as the scent of her freshly baked bread. Their children, Emily and Thomas, were lively and curious, always exploring the farm's nooks and crannies. But in the summer of 1932, something changed on the farm. It started with the whispers. Soft, indistinct murmurings that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. John first heard them one evening while tending to the horses in the barn. The sun had set, and the only light came from the dim lantern hanging by the door. The horses, usually calm in his presence, had grown restless, their ears flicking back and forth as if listening to something just beyond the range of human hearing. John dismissed their behavior as a reaction to a stray coyote, or perhaps a distant thunderstorm. But then he heard it. A low, almost imperceptible whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. He turned his head, expecting to see Mary or one of the children, but the barn was empty. The whispers grew more frequent over the next few days. Mary heard them too, late at night when the house was still and the only sound should have been the creaking of the old wooden beams. She tried to ignore them, brushing it off as the wind or her imagination playing tricks on her, but deep down a sense of unease began to take root. Emily and Thomas, normally so full of energy, became withdrawn and quiet, their youthful exuberance dulled by an unseen weight. The farm animals were not spared from the growing tension. The cows refused to enter the milking shed, lowing plaintively at the entrance, as if something unseen barred their way. The chickens, once free to roam the yard, huddled together in their coop, refusing to leave even when coaxed with their favorite feed. John, a man of logic and reason, couldn't understand what was happening. He inspected every inch of the property, looking for signs of disease, predators, or anything else that could explain the animals' behavior, but found nothing. As the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder and more distinct. They began to take on the tone of voices that spoke in a language no one in the family could understand. It wasn't just a single voice, either. There were many, overlapping and intertwining in a haunting chorus that filled the air with an unnatural chill. The children were the most affected, their nights plagued by nightmares that left them screaming and drenched in sweat. They described shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their rooms, figures that dissolved into mist whenever they tried to focus on them. One night, as a storm raged outside, Mary woke with a start. The house was cold, colder than it should have been, even with the storm. She reached for the blankets, only to find that they were already pulled tightly around her. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from a deep, primal fear. She turned her head, and there, standing at the foot of the bed, was a figure. It was tall and cloaked in darkness, its features indistinguishable. Mary's breath caught in her throat as the figure slowly raised an arm, pointing directly at her. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving behind only the sound of her racing heartbeat. John found her the next morning, huddled under the blankets, her eyes wide with terror. She tried to explain what she had seen, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was point to the spot where the figure had stood. John, shaken but determined, decided that it was time to take action. He drove into town to speak with Father O'Connor, the local priest, hoping that he might offer some comfort or guidance. Father O'Connor listened intently as John recounted the strange events, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When John finished, the priest was silent for a long time before finally speaking. "There are forces in this world, John," he said slowly, "that we do not fully understand. They exist in the spaces between light and shadow, where the veil between our world and theirs is thin. I believe that something has crossed that veil and taken root on your farm." The priest agreed to visit the farm the following day. When he arrived, he immediately sensed the oppressive atmosphere that hung over the place. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers seemed to follow them wherever they went. Father O'Connor walked the perimeter of the property, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers. But the shadows only seemed to grow darker, the whispers more insistent. That night, the storm returned, fiercer than before. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the fields in brief, blinding flashes. The wind howled like a wounded animal, tearing through the wheat and battering the house. Inside, the Miller family huddled together in the living room, the walls vibrating with each thunderclap. Father O'Connor had insisted on staying with them, hoping his presence might offer some protection. But as the storm raged on, it became clear that whatever haunted the farm had no intention of leaving. Around midnight, the voices grew louder than ever, rising above the howling wind and crashing thunder. They spoke in unison now, a single booming voice that shook the very foundations of the house. The family covered their ears, but the sound seemed to penetrate their skulls, echoing inside their heads. The temperature in the room plummeted, their breath visible in the icy air. Then the shadows began to move. They slithered across the walls, coalescing into shapes that were both familiar and terrifying. Faces appeared, twisted, anguished faces that leered at the family with hollow eyes. The figures stretched and distorted, their limbs elongating as they reached out toward the Millers. Father O'Connor stood in the center of the room, holding his crucifix aloft, but the shadows recoiled only briefly before pressing forward once more. In a moment of clarity, John realized that the voices were trying to communicate. They weren't just making noise. They were demanding something. Desperate, he shouted into the darkness, "What do you want?" The voices fell silent, the sudden quiet as jarring as the noise had been. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, from the deepest shadow, a figure emerged. It was the same figure Mary had seen at the foot of her bed, but now it was clearer, more solid. It stepped forward, its movement slow and deliberate, until it stood directly in front of John. "I am the keeper of the forgotten," it said, its voice a low, rumbling growl that seemed to reverberate through the walls. "This land was once mine, and it will be mine again. You have trespassed on sacred ground, and for that you must pay the price." John's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process the figure's words. "What do you mean?" "This farm has been in my family for generations. We've taken care of it, nurtured it. We've never seen or heard of you before." The keeper's eyes glowed with an eerie light as it regarded John. "You are but the latest in a long line of intruders," it hissed. "The land remembers. It remembers the blood that was spilled here, the lives that were taken. It remembers the promise that was made and broken. The time of reckoning has come." The air grew thick with tension as the keeper's words hung in the room. Mary clutched Emily and Thomas to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. Father O'Connor, still holding his crucifix, began to recite a prayer, but his voice wavered, the words faltering on his lips. John took a step forward, his hands trembling but his resolve firm. "What do you want from us?" he demanded. "What can we do to make this right?" The keeper tilted its head, as if considering the question. "There's nothing you can do to undo what has been done," it said slowly, "but you can offer a sacrifice, a life freely given to appease the spirits of this land. Only then will they be at peace, and only then will you be allowed to stay." The room was deathly silent as the weight of the keeper's words sank in. John felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. A sacrifice. A life freely given. He looked at his family, at the fear in their eyes, and knew that he could never ask them to make such a choice. But what other option was there? Before he could speak, Mary stepped forward. "Take me," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "If a life is what you need, take mine. I will give it willingly if it means saving my family." John's heart lurched in his chest. "Mary, no," he cried, reaching for her, but she shrugged. "This is my choice, John," she said softly. "I won't let our children suffer for something that happened long before they were born. If my life can bring peace to this land, then I will give it." The keeper regarded Mary with a cold, calculating gaze. "You would give your life so easily?" it asked. Mary nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I would." For a moment, the room was still. Then the keeper nodded. "So be it." As the words left its mouth, the shadows surged forward, enveloping Mary in their inky darkness. John screamed, trying to reach her, but an invisible force held him back. The last thing he saw was Mary's face, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. Before she disappeared completely, the shadows receded, taking Mary with them, and the room was plunged into an eerie silence. The whispers were gone, the cold had lifted, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the farm for so long had vanished, but the price had been paid, and nothing would ever be the same. In the days that followed, the Miller family tried to move on, but the loss of Mary left a void that could never be filled. The farm, once vibrant and full of life, felt empty and hollow. John tried to continue with the daily chores, but his heart wasn't in it. The children, too, were changed. They no longer laughed or played as they once did, their innocence stolen by the horrors they had witnessed. The land, however, seemed to thrive. The crops grew tall and strong, the animals healthy and productive. The farm was more prosperous than it had ever been, but the cost was too high. Years passed, and the story of the Miller farm became one of legend. Travelers passing through would speak of the whispers in the wind, the shadows that moved on their own, and the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her family. The farm itself became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking answers or solace, but none who came ever stayed for long. The land remembered, and it would not allow anyone to forget. As for John, he lived out the rest of his days on the farm, haunted by the memories of that fateful night. He never remarried, never left the land that had taken so much from him. He tended to the fields and cared for the animals, but his heart was no longer in it. In the quiet moments, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows grew long, he would hear them, the whispers. But now they were different, softer, almost comforting. And sometimes, just sometimes, he could swear he heard Mary's voice among them, telling him that she was at peace. But John was never at peace. He died many years later, alone in the house that had once been filled with laughter and love. The farm passed to his children, who left soon after, unable to bear the weight of their father's legacy. In the land remained as it always had, waiting for the next family, the next sacrifice, the next chapter in its dark and twisted history. For the land remembers, and it will never forget. The legend of the lost village. The village of Brookhaven was a quaint, picturesque place nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and life flowed gently, like the brook from which the village took its name. However, there was one story that had long haunted the village, the tale of the lost village that lay somewhere deep within the woods, shrouded in mystery and folklore. It was a chilly autumn evening when Clara Thompson, a young historian from the city, arrived in Brookhaven. Her interest had been piqued by the legend of the lost village, which had been passed down through generations. According to the villagers, the lost village had vanished from maps and memory centuries ago, but strange occurrences and eerie sightings continued to spark curiosity and fear among those who dared to seek it out. Clara, armed with her camera and notebooks, was determined to uncover the truth behind the legend. The villagers, though friendly, were reluctant to discuss the lost village. They whispered about it in hushed tones, exchanging uneasy glances whenever the topic arose. Clara, undeterred, decided to venture into the woods the next morning, guided only by the cryptic clues she had gathered from local folklore. As dawn broke, Clara set off into the forest, her path marked by fallen leaves and the soft rustle of branches. The forest was dense, with trees that seemed to reach towards the sky, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that allowed only the faintest rays of sunlight to penetrate. The deeper Clara ventured, the more she felt as if she were being watched. The atmosphere grew heavy with an almost tangible sense of anticipation, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. After hours of trekking through the underbrush, Clara came upon an old stone marker, partially covered in moss. It was inscribed with faded runes and symbols she couldn't decipher. She photographed the marker and continued her journey, the air growing colder with each step. The Sen forest seemed to close in around her, the trees casting long, ghostly shadows that danced in the dim light. As evening approached, Clara stumbled upon what appeared to be the remnants of an ancient stone wall, partially obscured by overgrowth. Her heart raced with excitement as she realized that this could be the entrance to the lost village. She pushed through the tangled vines and found a narrow pathway leading further into the woods. The path, though narrow and overgrown, seemed to guide her deeper into the heart of the forest. It was as if the woods themselves were leading her towards the village. Clara followed the path, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the trees. The air grew colder, and she could see her breath forming in small, misty clouds. The path finally opened up into a clearing, and Clara's breath caught in her throat as she beheld the sight before her. The lost village was not entirely lost, but rather hidden beneath the cloak of time and nature. The buildings were in ruins, their once proud facades now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The village square, though eerily silent, held the remnants of what once was, a central fountain now dry and cracked with weeds growing in its basin. Clara walked cautiously through the village, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. She could see the skeletal remains of houses, their windows broken and doors ajar. It was as if the village had been frozen in time, its inhabitants vanishing in an instant. In the center of the village, Clara found a large, ornate building that appeared to be the town hall or some other significant structure. The building was more intact than the others, though it bore the marks of age and neglect. She pushed open the creaking doors and stepped inside, the dim light from her flashlight revealing a grand interior covered in dust and cobwebs. The walls were adorned with faded murals depicting scenes of daily life, farming, festivals, and gatherings. Clara could almost feel the echoes of laughter and music that once filled the hall. She noticed a large, ornate mirror on one wall, its surface covered in a thick layer of grime. As she approached the mirror, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and Clara's breath became visible in the frigid air. She heard a soft, whispering sound like distant voices carried on the wind. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and Clara could make out fragments of words. Pleas, warnings, and names she couldn't recognize. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she realized the whispers seemed to be coming from the mirror. With trembling hands, Clara wiped the dust from the mirror's surface. As she did, the whispers grew louder, and the reflection in the mirror began to shift and change. Instead of her own image, she saw fleeting glimpses of people. Men, women, and children, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces filled with fear and sadness. Determined to uncover the source of the haunting, Clara began to search the village for clues. She explored the remaining buildings, each one revealing fragments of the past, old journals, letters, and photographs that painted a picture of a once thriving community. One of the letters she found was addressed to a person named Eliza, who seemed to have been a key figure in the village. The letter spoke of a great danger approaching the village, a threat that could not be stopped. It mentioned something called the Shadow's Curse, and warned of dire consequences if the village did not prepare. As Clara read the letter, the whispers from the mirror grew louder, forming coherent sentences. They spoke of betrayal and a pact made with dark forces. Clara learned that the village had been cursed by an ancient entity seeking revenge. The villagers, in a desperate attempt to save themselves, had made a dark pact that required them to vanish from the world, leaving only their ghostly presence behind. The story told of a ritual performed under the light of a full moon, meant to bind the curse and protect the village from the entity. However, something had gone wrong, and instead of vanquishing the curse, the ritual had trapped the villagers in a liminal space, forever lost between the realms of the living and the dead. Clara's heart pounded as she realized that the lost village was not just a forgotten place, but a realm of spirits bound by a curse. The whispers grew more frantic, urging her to leave before it was too late. Despite the growing sense of dread, Clara felt a deep sense of responsibility to uncover the truth and help the trapped souls find peace. That night, Clara decided to stay in the village, hoping to gather more information and perhaps find a way to break the curse. As darkness fell, she set up her camp in the town hall, the place that seemed to hold the most significant connection to the village's history. The night sky was clear and the full moon cast an eerie glow over the village. Clara watched as the shadows danced and shifted, their movements strangely synchronized with the whispers that filled the air. The temperature dropped further, and a chilling breeze swept through the village, making the leaves rustle with an almost spectral quality. At midnight, Clara was startled by a sudden commotion. The whispers grew louder and she saw ghostly figures emerging from the shadows. They moved with purpose, converging on the town hall. Clara followed them, her heart racing with a mix of fear and anticipation. In the town hall, the spirits gathered around the ornate mirror, their forms growing more defined as they chanted in an ancient, forgotten language. The air was charged with energy, and Clara could feel the ground vibrating beneath her feet. The spirits seemed to be reenacting the ritual described in the letter, their movements a blend of desperation and hope. As the ritual reached its climax, Clara saw a figure emerge from the crowd of spirits. It was a woman in old-fashioned clothing, her face marked by sorrow and determination. She approached Clara and spoke in a voice that was both haunting and familiar. She introduced herself as Eliza, the leader of the village who had performed the ritual all those years ago. Eliza explained that the curse had been a result of a betrayal by a trusted member of the village who had sought to harness dark powers for personal gain. The curse had bound the villagers in a state of limbo, unable to move on to the afterlife. The ritual they were performing was their last chance to break the curse and free their souls. Clara realized that she had a role to play in the ritual. The spirits needed her help to complete the ceremony and break the curse. Eliza guided her through the steps, and Clara joined in the chant, her voice blending with the whispers of the spirits. The energy in the room surged, and the mirror began to glow with a radiant light. As the ritual reached its zenith, the mirror's surface rippled and shimmered. The spirits' faces showed a mixture of relief and joy, their forms becoming less translucent and more solid. Clara felt a profound sense of peace as the curse began to unravel, the oppressive weight of the forest lifting. Mirror's light grew brighter and Clara could see the village transforming. The buildings began to repair themselves, their structures becoming more defined and less decayed. The ghostly figures of the villagers started to fade, their presence growing lighter and less menacing. In the once foreboding atmosphere, the village was replaced by a sense of tranquility. Eliza's figure approached Clara one last time, her expression one of gratitude. She thanked Clara for her bravery and for helping to set their spirits free. With a final, grateful smile, Eliza and the other villagers began to dissolve into the moonlight, their forms becoming faint and ephemeral as they moved towards the afterlife. Clara watched, her eyes filled with tears, as the village and its inhabitants slowly faded from view. The full moon cast a soft glow over the clearing, illuminating the restored beauty of the village for just a moment before it too began to disappear. The forest, once so foreboding and dark, now seemed welcoming and serene. Clara stood alone in the clearing, the echoes of the villagers' whispers lingering in the air, like a gentle breeze. As dawn approached, Clara took one last look at the village, now just a memory etched into the landscape. She walked back through the forest, her heart heavy with the weight of the night's events, but also uplifted by the sense of closure she had helped bring to the lost souls. So the path she had followed was now clearer, as if the forest itself had paved the way for her return. The village of Brookhaven welcomed Clara back with warm smiles and curious questions. The villagers, who had been apprehensive about her quest, were now eager to hear about her experiences. Clara recounted the story of the lost village, the ritual, and the spirits she had encountered. Her account was met with astonishment and reverence, and the legend of the lost village took on a new dimension in the local lore. Over time, the story of Clara's journey became a cherished part of Brookhaven's history. The tale of the lost village was no longer just a shadowy legend, but a testament to the enduring spirit of those who had lived and loved there. Clara's adventure had not only revealed the truth behind the village, but had also bridged the gap between the past and the present. Years passed since that fateful night in the lost village, but the impact of Clara's experience continued to ripple through Brookhaven. The village had transformed from a place known for its ghostly legends into a beacon of historical and spiritual significance. Clara's story had become an integral part of Brookhaven's cultural heritage, and the villagers had taken to preserving and celebrating the history of their ancestors. A museum dedicated to the lost village was established in Brookhaven, its exhibits featuring artifacts and photographs from Clara's journey. The museum became a popular destination for historians, curious travelers, and those fascinated by the supernatural. It was filled with relics from the village, pieces of old furniture, remnants of clothing, and even fragments of the ancient stone marker that Clara had discovered. Visitors to the museum were often captivated by the story of Clara's adventure, and the exhibits provided a tangible connection to the past. Interactive displays allowed guests to experience the eerie atmosphere of the lost village through virtual reality, where they could explore the ruins and witness the spectral reenactments of the village's final days. The museum's most popular feature was a life-sized recreation of the town hall, complete with its grand interior and the mirror that had played a pivotal role in breaking the curse. Clara herself continued to be a part of the museum's story, sharing her experiences through lectures and personal appearances. Her presence was a reminder of the courage and dedication it took to uncover the truth and bring peace to the lost souls. The museum's staff often spoke of Clara with great admiration, noting her tireless efforts and deep empathy for the villagers. The story of the lost village had also inspired a new generation of explorers and historians. Young people from Brookhaven and beyond were drawn to the mystery and allure of the village, eager to follow in Clara's footsteps and uncover their own secrets. Local schools incorporated the tale into their curriculum, teaching students about history, folklore, and the importance of perseverance in the face of adversity. One such student was Emily Carter, a high school junior with a keen interest in history and the supernatural. Emily had grown up hearing the story of Clara's journey from her grandparents, who had been children when the village was rediscovered. Inspired by Clara's bravery, Emily decided to undertake her own research into the lost village, hoping to uncover new details and contribute to the ongoing exploration of its mysteries. Emily's research led her to uncover previously unknown documents and accounts related to the village. She discovered letters, diaries, and personal artifacts that had been hidden away in the archives of Brookhaven's local library. These findings provided new insights into the lives of the villagers and the nature of the curse that had plagued them. Among the documents, Emily found a diary belonging to a young girl named Sarah, who had lived in the lost village. The diary described the daily life of the village, the close-knit community, and the growing sense of dread as the curse took hold. Sarah's account painted a vivid picture of the villagers' struggles and their ultimate fate, adding a new layer of depth to the story. Emily's discoveries were presented at the museum, and the new information was eagerly embraced by both the local community and visitors. The Diary of Sarah became one of the museum's most treasured exhibits, offering a personal perspective on the village history and the impact of the curse. The renewed interest in the lost village also led to the establishment of an annual festival in Brookhaven, celebrating the village's history and its significance. The festival included reenactments of key events, storytelling sessions, and interactive exhibits that allowed attendees to experience the village's past firsthand. It became a time for the community to come together, honor their heritage, and celebrate the legacy of Clara's journey. As the years went by, Clara remained a beloved figure in Brookhaven. Her contributions to the town's history were celebrated with an annual award named in her honor, recognizing individuals who demonstrated exceptional dedication to preserving and exploring local history. The Clara Thompson Award became a prestigious accolade, and its recipients were often featured in the museum's exhibits and local media. Clara's influence extended beyond Brookhaven as well. Her story inspired similar explorations and investigations into other lost or forgotten places around the world. Historians and adventurers looked to Clara's journey as a model of courage and curiosity, and her work became a touchstone for those seeking to uncover the hidden secrets of history. In her later years, Clara continued to visit Brookhaven, where she was greeted with warmth and gratitude by the community. The village had become a symbol of hope and perseverance, and Clara's role in uncovering its story was celebrated as a testament to the power of determination and empathy. One particular visit stood out in Clara's memory. It was a clear autumn evening, much like the one when she first arrived in Brookhaven. The village was alive with the colors of fall, and the air was crisp and invigorating. Clara walked through the village square, now a vibrant and bustling place with shops, cafes, and a new sense of vitality. As she passed by the museum, Clara was greeted by familiar faces and new friends. The festival was in full swing, and the streets were filled with laughter and music. Clara felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she watched the community celebrate and honor the history she had helped to uncover. In the heart of the festival, Clara was presented with a special tribute, a beautifully crafted book containing the stories and memories of those who had been touched by the lost village and its legend. The book was filled with photographs, personal accounts, and reflections from the people of Brookhaven, each page a testament to the enduring legacy of the village and its history. As Clara read through the pages, she was overwhelmed with emotion. The book was a testament to the impact of her journey and the profound connection between the past and the present. It was a reminder of the importance of preserving history and the power of storytelling to bridge the gap between generations. Clara's visit concluded with a ceremony held in the town hall, the very place where her journey had begun. The hall was decorated with flowers and candles, and the atmosphere was filled with a sense of reverence and celebration. Clara was honored with a commemorative plaque, which was placed in the town hall as a lasting tribute to her contributions. As the ceremony drew to a close, Clara took one last look at the village that had become her second home. The lost village had been found, its story told, and its legacy preserved. Clara felt a deep sense of peace and accomplishment, knowing that she had played a part in bringing the village's history to light and ensuring that its memory would endure for generations to come. The legend of the lost village continued to inspire and captivate those who heard it, and Clara's journey became a symbol of the enduring power of curiosity, bravery, and compassion. The village of Brookhaven, once shrouded in mystery and darkness, had been transformed into a beacon of history and hope, and Clara's story remained a shining example of the impact one person's determination and empathy could have on the world. And so, the tale of the lost village lived on, not as a shadowy legend but as a celebration of the past and a testament to the unbreakable spirit of those who had once called it home. Clara's legacy continued to shine brightly, a reminder that even the most elusive mysteries could be unraveled with courage and heart. In a secret hideout in the woods, in the heart of the Blackwood Forest, a realm where ancient trees stretch high into the sky and dense foliage chokes out the light, lies a place shrouded in enigma and legend. This forest is no ordinary woodlands, but a sprawling labyrinth of shadows and secrets. It is said that deep within its confines, concealed beneath the thick canopy and tangled roots, lies a secret hideout. Stories have circulated for generations, telling of this lost sanctuary where fugitives and explorers once sought refuge. Now, it is rumored to be the epicenter of strange phenomena and mysterious disappearances, attracting those driven by curiosity and a hunger for adventure. The Blackwood Forest is infamous for its foreboding atmosphere. As one ventures deeper into its depths, the forest becomes increasingly unwelcoming. The sunlight struggles to penetrate the thick canopy, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. The ground is a mosaic of fallen leaves, twisted roots, and hidden stones that threaten to trip the unwary traveler. In this eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle or distant call of a bird, Eliza Harper, a dedicated historian, begins her quest. Alyssa had always been drawn to the unknown, a trait that led her to the Blackwood Forest. Her fascination with the secret hideout had begun years ago when she stumbled upon an old journal entry from a forgotten explorer. The entry described a hidden sanctuary, lost to time and cloaked in mystery. Driven by a relentless curiosity and a thirst for uncovering lost truths, Eliza set out with only a partially deciphered map and a determination that bordered on obsession. The first few days of Eliza's expedition were relatively uneventful, though not without their own sense of foreboding. She noted how the forest seemed to shift around her, the trees whispering secrets she could not quite understand. Each night, as she settled by her campfire, she felt the weight of the forest's silence pressing in on her. The flames of her fire seemed to flicker in response to unseen forces, and the shadows around her camp grew longer and more menacing with each passing hour. On the fourth night, Eliza was jolted awake by a soft, rhythmic tapping sound. The noise was faint, but persistent, like the beat of a distant drum. She unzipped her tent and peered into the darkness, but the forest outside was impenetrable. The sounds continued, growing louder and more erratic. Eliza's flashlight revealed nothing but the tangled underbrush and the looming silhouettes of trees. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, but she pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. By the end of the week, Eliza had ventured deeper into the forest than any of her predecessors. She had come across numerous signs of previous inhabitants, scattered remnants of old campsites, abandoned tools, and fragments of broken pottery. Each discovery added to the mystery but also heightened her sense of unease. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees bending inward as if conspiring to obscure her path. One day, after an arduous trek through the dense underbrush, Eliza stumbled upon a wide clearing. The openness was both a relief and a source of anxiety. In the center of the clearing stood an imposing stone archway, covered in thick vines and moss. The archway was intricately carved with symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dappled sunlight. Eliza felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached, her fingers tracing the cold, weathered stones. The symbols were unfamiliar but held a certain allure, drawing her closer. With a mixture of trepidation and excitement, Eliza stepped through the archway and into a new world. The forest on the other side was markedly different, darker, more oppressive, and imbued with an ancient aura. The path before her was narrow and winding, flanked by trees that seemed even older and more gnarled than those she had encountered before. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the ground was uneven, littered with hidden crevices and tangled roots. As Eliza navigated this new terrain, she noticed subtle changes in the environment. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. The sounds of the forest became more muted, and an eerie silence settled around her. The further she went, the more the sense of being observed grew stronger, and the occasional rustle or snap of a twig seemed amplified in the stillness. After hours of traversing this unsettling landscape, Eliza arrived at the entrance of a cave. The cave's mouth was partially concealed by a tangle of vines and thick undergrowth, making it appear almost as if it had been intentionally hidden. A cold, damp breeze wafted from within, carrying a faint, metallic odor that was both intriguing and unsettling. Eliza's heart raced as she pushed aside the vines and entered the cave, her flashlight casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. Inside the cave was vast and foreboding. Stalactites dripped water into shallow pools, creating a rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings and symbols, some of which matched those on the archway outside, while others were unfamiliar and more elaborate. The air was damp and heavy, and the temperature dropped significantly the deeper Eliza ventured. As she explored the cave, Eliza discovered various artifacts scattered about: rusted tools, remnants of old clothing, and broken pottery. These items suggested that the cave had been used as a shelter at some point in its history. The deeper she went, the more the cave seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, as if it were alive and aware of her presence. At the far end of the cave, Eliza found a hidden chamber. It was smaller than the main cave, but filled with an air of solemnity and significance. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, intricately carved with the same symbols that adorned the cave walls. The altar was surrounded by candles, their flames burning with an otherworldly light. The room was bathed in a dim, flickering glow that cast eerie shadows on the walls. On the altar lay a leather-bound book, its cover adorned with the same symbols that had appeared throughout the cave. Eliza's hands trembled as she reached for the book, her fingers brushing against the ancient leather. As she opened the book, she discovered pages filled with handwritten notes and detailed sketches of rituals and ceremonies. The entries described practices that were both arcane and mystifying, hinting at a profound connection to the supernatural. The final pages of the book were scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic script. They detailed a growing sense of dread and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. The entries became increasingly erratic, reflecting a descent into fear and paranoia. Eliza felt a chill as she read the final entry, which spoke of a powerful artifact hidden within the cave, an object of great significance and danger. As Eliza finished reading, a cold draft swept through the chamber, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and Eliza felt an oppressive weight bearing down on her. When she looked up, she saw a shadowy figure standing at the entrance of the chamber. The figure was tall and indistinct, its form shrouded in darkness. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she realized she was not alone. The shadowy figure remained motionless, its gaze fixed on her. With a mixture of fear and resolve, Eliza turned back to the book and read aloud the final passage. As her voice echoed through the chamber, the ground beneath her began to tremble, and the walls seemed to close in. The shadowy figure remained still, but an unseen force seemed to press in around her, creating a sensation of suffocating pressure. The tremors intensified, and loose stones fell from the ceiling, causing Eliza to scramble for stability. In the chaos, the shadowy figure began to move, its form becoming slightly clearer but still indistinct. It raised a hand, pointing towards the back of the chamber. Eliza, driven by a mixture of fear and determination, followed the figure's gesture and discovered a hidden passage behind the altar. The passage was narrow and dark, but something compelled Eliza to enter. As she crawled through the passage, the tremors in the cave grew more violent, and the air became thick with a palpable sense of fear. The passage led to a small underground chamber, its walls adorned with ancient murals depicting rituals and ceremonies. At the center of the chamber was a pedestal, upon which rested a beautifully crafted amulet with a glowing gem embedded. The amulet seemed to pulse with an inner light, casting a soothing yet eerie glow around the room. Eliza reached out to take the amulet, and as her fingers made contact, the tremors ceased abruptly. The cave fell silent, and the shadowy figure vanished. Eliza felt a sudden sense of calm, but the lingering unease of her encounter remained. The amulet was undeniably powerful, but its true nature and the mysteries surrounding it remained elusive.
With the amulet in hand, Eliza made her way back through the passage and the cave. The sense of being watched had receded, but the strange occurrences left her with more questions than answers. As she emerged into the forest, she was filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The secret hideout had revealed some of its secrets, but the true nature of its power and the enigmatic events surrounding it was still shrouded in mystery.
Eliza knew that her journey was far from over. The amulet was a key to something greater, and the forest still held many secrets. The Blackwood Forest, with its dark, tangled paths and ancient, hidden chambers, continued to guard its mysteries. Eliza Harper, with her unyielding curiosity and her newfound knowledge, was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The forest shadows and enigmas beckoned, promising that the adventure was just beginning, and the secrets of the secret hideout were yet to be fully uncovered.